You put on the skin first.
That's
right. You build the skin, then you build the skeleton.
That's right.
That's right. Quite remarkable.
And this is what you see.
With just wood and rope, the Egyptians created seagoing ships and barges big and strong enough to carry obelisks. But how is such a tremendous weight loaded onto a boat without tipping it over? Owen Roberts has come up with a boat design that would make the job easier.
In order to carry the weight and to have it high, as in Hatshepsut, of course, we had to go for a great beam.
Whoa, that is wide.
Beam. It is, wasn't it?
A real wide-bodied barge.
Yes, indeed. And
to prevent capsizing, a barge capable of carrying Hatshepsut's obelisks had to be extremely wide, with a length-to-width ratio of perhaps 2 to 1.
Wide. Yes, that's right. And this is the way you could get stability in a single hull.
Owen will try out his idea on a scale model. He beaches the front end, securing it to a ramp that leads smoothly up to the deck. Ropes run from the obelisk up the ramp, across the deck, and through 2 wooden blocks, which turn the ropes back toward the bank.
Yalla!
In this way, the pullers can stay high and dry on the beach and don't have to wade out into the river.
I think Owen's experiment was very successful. It's very feasible that the Egyptians simply constructed a ramp right onto one end of that boat and dragged not one, I actually think 2 large obelisks onto it.
After her obelisks were loaded, Hatshepsut's barge was towed downstream to Thebes and the great house of Amun, now known as Karnak Temple. Sprawling across hundreds of acres, the vast complex was expanded by a succession of pharaohs over the course of several centuries. The god himself was believed to reside in a statue, kept under lock and key in the dark heart of the temple, the Holy of Holies. The statue is now gone, but ancient inscriptions describe the ritual that Amun's priests enacted within these walls.
They would go in and with great ritual and ceremony, they would bring out the statue of the god. They would give it a symbolic meal. They would feed the god Amun, that is to give him offerings. They would give him incense and they would bathe him ritually. They would give him clothes.
Sometimes the priest would take the statue of Amun across the Nile to the west bank of Thebes to visit the tombs of kings and nobles.
The family members of those deceased would be having barbecues out in front of their tombs, literally picnics, to have a communal meal with Amun and all the ancestors. All the statues of the deceased kings, who were gods in their own right, would be brought out of their temples to greet Amun. And then, of course, Amun would be brought back into Karnak Temple, down that axis, put into his little inner house at the back part of the Karnak Temple, and he would be, in effect, put to bed. The doors would be resealed with great ceremony, and then Amun would be at rest again.
As time went on, the quest to please and impress Amun drove pharaohs to erect bigger and bigger obelisks. Weighing up to 500 tons, these were some of the largest single stones ever quarried anywhere in the world. They were carved by hand and adorned with intricate hieroglyphs. Somehow, the Egyptians managed to stand them on end without breaking them. Each balanced upon a small stone pedestal with no support other than its own enormous weight. Only a handful of ancient obelisks survive intact in their original positions. All physical evidence of how they were raised has disappeared, except for one tantalizing clue.
This groove is one of the only direct pieces of evidence we have as to how they actually erected the obelisks.
On every pedestal stone, a deep groove is carved in one side. Without this groove, the obelisk might slip across its base. But the groove acts as a brake, and it helps keep the obelisk aligned when it's pulled to vertical. The trick is getting one edge of a stone weighing hundreds of tons safely into the turning groove.
It just moves from there onto the roller point here.
Mark Whitby is one of Britain's leading engineers.
And so we start applying load at the front.
He's devised a unique theory of how the ancient Egyptians might have raised their obelisks.
Tips it over.
Inspired by the complex wood and rope work on Egyptian ships, Mark has designed an elaborate system to rotate the obelisk slowly down onto its pedestal stone.
Pull it vertical and put it in the position much as it really is in real life.
He hopes to try out his idea in a quarry in Aswan. A 30-ton granite obelisk has been placed atop an earthen ramp, and preparations are underway to lower it 12 feet into a turning groove. The first task is to assemble a large wooden framework that will provide the mechanical advantage to rotate the obelisk safely. In this supporting role is Rick Brown, a sculptor and timber framer from Massachusetts. At the moment, he has no idea that events will soon propel him to center stage in the obelisk drama. Meanwhile, Owen Roberts and his son, Yola, are in charge of rigging nearly a mile's worth of rope. With all this rope and wood, Mark Whitby hopes to harness the giant stone and carefully control its descent. While the engineer and his small army of assistants scramble to build their complicated contraption, Roger Hopkins is pursuing a completely different approach. With the large-scale obelisk already spoken for, Roger is left to experiment with a mini 2-ton block. And he's not happy about it.
If they ever give me a decent obelisk to work with, then we can do something. But no, I always end up in dog patch with the puniest little, you know what I mean.
Even though his obelisk is small, Roger still has to lower it with care.
Up on the ramp.
But instead of relying on ropes, he prefers a method that is more low-tech.
This is more like an ancient elevator of sorts.
So you're going to put it out onto this sand and then take the sand away to lower it down to its base.
Yeah, we're going to drag it out, drop it on this pile of sand. Now I've got
Buried under 21 tons of sand is Roger's miniature pedestal stone, complete with turning groove.
This block of wood goes all the way down to the turning groove of my pedestal stone. Likewise, so do I have a timber here and another one on the other side, which will help guide me when I'm removing the sand out from underneath the obelisk.
Roger's homespun technique doesn't impress Mark Whitby.
What we've got to do when you're moving these heavy stones around and wanting to put them somewhere is you've got to have absolute control over them. Imagine this for real with a 300-ton obelisk. And look at the sort of control Roger's got right now with his sledge.
I want, you know, we got to come, it's starting to shift over that way.
Stand up.
there's a thing called planning. You have to plan every single step in advance. And it's not appropriate necessarily to run back and get the chainsaw and slice off bits of sledge because you haven't thought about how long it needed to be to begin with.
That's it. A loss.
In spite of Mark's criticisms, Roger is not alone in his support for the sandpit method.
We have a number of pieces of evidence that sand was used in this way for lowering colossal sarcophagi down tomb shafts and for raising monuments like obelisks. There's actually an ancient papyrus where one scribe taunts another one, challenging him to design a way to erect a monument of thy lord, namely the pharaoh. It could be an obelisk, maybe a statue.
The 3,000-year-old document reads, "Empty the space that has been filled with sand beneath the monument of thy Lord, so that the monument may be established in its place."
There it goes. There it goes.
Many scholars believe
Well,
the Egyptians
trying to make
used
it come
sand,
forward a little bit,
but others argue that it's
but I
difficult
also
to
want it to
control.
come forward and over this way a little
Removing
bit.
it from around the base of a 300 or 400-ton obelisk could be dangerous.
You know, we've come quite a way so far.
Okay, we got it pretty level for you all the way around.
Yeah.
A little bit here and a little bit there.
After a couple of hours, the obelisk is reaching the bottom of the sandpit,
There, just move.
and Roger is now removing the sand with his bare hands.
Roger,
Yeah.
do you think they would ever have been literally doing it by hand with a 400-tonner like you are?
Yep.
I'm asking, you think so?
Yeah. Why not?
Now you're in charge and you're doing this, so you watch out.
Why? Watch out what?
Well,
it just
move it.
moved, you know, ever so slowly.
Well, it looked freaky from here
Yeah.
with your hand under there.
I could see it moving. I could even feel it moving.
Now, do you think in ancient Egypt the guy in charge would literally be sticking his hand under there?
If he failed, his head would be rolling.
He'd stick his hand under there.
He'd stick his hand under there. He'd want to make sure this thing was going to go exactly the way he wanted.
It's literally moving by millimeters.
Millimeter by millimeter, the obelisk sinks lower.
There's the turning groove, right there. And I've got my obelisk posed right over it. Look at that. Look at that, will you? Clean it out for the rest of the way. There it goes.
Wow. That was its final adjustment.
Yeah.
I'm glad my fingers weren't under there.
Roger's obelisk came to rest at an angle of about 60 degrees. Weighing only 2 tons, it's not difficult to pull the stone to vertical.
Hoera! On deck! Beth! Hafif! Hafif!
But the ancient obelisks were up to 500 tons, and pulling them upright was not so simple. To make the job easier, Mark Whitby thinks the Egyptians would have lowered their obelisks to a much steeper angle, like 80 degrees.
Our goal with this method is to get the obelisk into as steep an angle as possible. Actually, to get it to vertical with not a lot of effort. We're trying to control it very precisely in the way it comes forward.
To make the obelisk go forward, gangs of men will pull on ropes suspended from the wooden frame. Mark hopes that as these ropes tighten, the obelisk will tilt downwards and eventually rotate around the large pivot log.
This mechanism is a bit of an ingenious device, but actually I'm an engineer, and that's exactly what engineer means, an ingenious person. You know, as an engineer, it means we've actually planned the process. We've done lots of calculations. We've calculated dimensions, we've calculated weights, we're calculating how the weights move as the obelisk rotates. I'm happy our sums are right, but equally, you know, one has to double check, and we're going to find out shortly.
Mark has done a lot of calculations, and of course we know that the